The empire was over, so Europe thought. In 1814, Napoleon Bonaparte abdicated and sailed to Elba, a tiny island kingdom for a giant reputation. Kings came home, borders were redrawn at the Congress of Vienna, and diplomats congratulated one another for restoring order after a quarter-century of war. Then lightning struck twice. In March 1815, Napoleon slipped past the Royal Navy and set foot on French soil with fewer than 1,000 men. The road to Paris filled with soldiers sent to arrest him, who instead cheered him. Vive l'Empereur! The tricolour unfurled again above the Tuileries. An old world shuddered. Europe answered with the Seventh Coalition, Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, and the German states, vowing to end the Bonaparte question, finally and forever. Their strategy, converge on France from every direction, overwhelmed by numbers, and exile Napoleon to somewhere no ship could slip away from again. Bonaparte saw one hope. Before the coalition armies could fully unite, he would strike north into Belgium, separating the two nearest foes, the Anglo-Allied army under the cool, defensive genius Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, and the Prussian army under the fierce Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, and defeat them in detail. On the 16th of June, Napoleon beat the Prussians at Ligny. They retreated, blooded but cohesive. The same day, Wellington checked Marshal Ney at Quatre Bras and pulled back to a low ridge he had scouted months earlier, near a village called Waterloo. If Napoleon could keep the Prussians away while he crushed Wellington, the political map might yet be rewritten. He sent Marshal Grouchy with 33,000 men to shadow Blücher. The rest of the Army du Nord marched after Wellington. Night fell with heavy rain. The fields became porridge. Artillery sank to the hubs. On the morning of the 18th of June 1815, fog lifted from a shallow valley south of Brussels. Two commanders stared at each other across muddy ground, and the last act of the Napoleonic age began. Wellington's ground was a gift to a defensive mind, a reverse slope along the Mont-Saint-Jean ridge that hid his infantry from direct French artillery fire. Ahead of his line stood three forward bastions. Hougoumont on the right, a walled chateau and farm with orchards and woodlards. La Haye Sainte near the center, a sturdy farm complex guarding the main Brussels road. Papelotte La Haye on the left, small hamlets tying the Allied line toward the Prussians' route of return. Wellington commanded roughly 67 to 70,000 men with about 150 to 180 guns, a patchwork army of British regulars, the King's German Legion, Hanoverians, Dutch Belgians, Nassauers, and Brunswickers. Many were veterans, many were not. His strength was not pageantry but placement: keep troops out of sight, let the ridge absorb the cannonade, and counterpunch where needed. Napoleon brought 72 to 73,000 men and 250-plus guns. D'Erlon's I Corps on the right. Rail's 2 Corps on the left. Lebau's 6 Corps in reserve. Massed cavalry under Ney and Milhaud. And, in the ultimate reserve, the Imperial Guard, the talisman of his legend. The Emperor planned to pin Wellington's flanks, smash the center-left with infantry supported by the Grand Battery, then unleash cavalry and guard to finish the job before any Prussians could bite into his right. But the rain had slowed him. Napoleon delayed his opening bombardment until the ground dried enough for guns to maneuver. Every hour he waited was an hour Blücher used to march from Wavre, and an hour Wellington used to settle his mixed army into the earth. Around 11:30 a.m., French gun captains lit fuses. The valley shook. Smoke rolled like a grey tide. Waterloo began. Napoleon opened by fixing Wellington's right at Hougoumont. If the Allies overcommitted to defend the chateau, other sectors would thin. If they undercommitted, the French might seize it and roll up the flank. Jerome Bonaparte's division hurled itself into the woods and orchard. The fight turned into a separate war, close, smoky, intimate. British guards and Nassauers fired through loopholes, French voltigeurs swarmed the outer walls, ladders scraped, axes rang on gates. At one crisis, a party of Frenchmen burst the north gate. A handful of guards slammed it shut behind them and shot down the intruders in the courtyard. That hinge, literal and symbolic, became the day's most famous door. All afternoon, the French fed brigades into this furnace. Wellington fed just enough to hold. The Duke later said the whole battle turned upon the closing of the gates at Hougoumont. Whether literally true or not, Hougoumont devoured thousands of French who might have mattered elsewhere. Meanwhile, the big drumbeat of guns shifted toward the center-left. At roughly 1:30 p.m., more than 70 French guns, the Grand Battery, poured iron into the Allied ridge. The reverse slope saved lives, but not all. Shells burst behind the crest, horses screamed, caisson burned. Then d'Erlon's I Corps came on, for massive infantry divisions in deep columns, bayonets glittering, guidons snapping in wet wind. They pushed between La Haye Sainte and Papelotte, and struck a wall of sudden musketry. Sir Thomas Picton's infantry, hidden until the last moment, rose from the reverse slope and fired point blank. The lines crashed together. Amid the chaos, Picton fell, shot through the head as he led a charge in civilian top hat and greatcoat. Wellington unleashed his counterstroke. The heavy cavalry, Household Brigade and Union Brigade, thundered over the crest. Tall helmets flashed, sabers rose and fell. They smashed disordered French columns, overran several eagles, and in their momentum swept onto the French gun line, cutting down gunners. For 10 minutes, glory rode. Then the bill. The British horse had gone too far, blown and scattered. French lancers and cuirassiers countercharged, cutting them to pieces and hurling survivors back to the ridge. The center held, but at cost. And to the east, a new growl of cannon carried on the wind, Prussians. From about 3:30 p.m., through clotted smoke and churned mud, Marshal Ney misread movement on the Allied ridge as the beginnings of retreat. He chose speed over certainty and hurled wave after wave of heavy cavalry straight up the slope, without proper infantry or fresh artillery to crack the Allied formations. Wellington's infantry formed squares, four-sided hedgehogs of bayonets. Cavalry that hit a steady square dies in heaps or wheels away to regroup. For nearly 2 hours, cuirassiers and carabiniers surged and swirled around dozens of Allied squares. French trumpets called, British drums answered, canister blasts tore lanes, horses crashed onto steel. Officers in breastplates led from the front and fell in the front. Here and there, French troopers penetrated gun lines or seized colors. Here and everywhere they lacked the combined arms, supporting infantry and close guns, to break the squares once and for all. Ney sent messengers for more artillery. It came too late and too thin. He sent more cavalry instead, feeding valor into a grinder. The ridge was battered, not broken. Amid the storm, a different crisis brewed. The garrison of La Haye Sainte, the King's German Legion, was running out of cartridges. If that farm fell, French guns could be dragged to the very throat of Wellington's center. By 4:30 to 5 p.m., General Bulow's 4 corps of Prussians began striking Plancenoit, a village on Napoleon's right rear. Napoleon peeled off Lebau's 6 corps and then units of the Young Guard to hold the place. The battle split. Wellington clung to his ridge while, behind the French right, street fighting raged through Plancenoit's lanes and churchyard. At La Haye Sainte, Ney pressed again. The Germans, out of ammo, defended with bayonets and desperation. As evening gathered, the farm fell. French skirmishers poured into the buildings, batteries rattled forward into canister range of the Allied center. For the first time all day, the Allied position looked truly mortal. Wellington rode along the line, saving reserves, shifting brigades like a chess master under fire. The Duke knew the Prussians were coming, but he had to survive until they arrived in strength. Napoleon knew it too. He had to break the ridge before the grey columns turned a flank into a trap. The Emperor prepared his last reserve, the men who had never failed him. Around 7:30 p.m., the drums beat the pas de charge and the Imperial Guard stepped into legend, Middle and Old Guard battalions moving up through the gap near La Haye Sainte, officers steady, beards black against grey smoke. They climbed toward the ridge as French batteries spat over their heads. At the crest, behind the reverse slope, Maitland's British Guards lay waiting. At near pistol distance they rose and volleyed. Entire files of the Guard went down, still they dressed ranks and came on. On their left, another Guard column blundered into Chassé's Dutch Belgian division and the rallied troops of Hawkett. Volleys flared, bayonets crossed. The Guard wavered. Some units tried to form square, some stood and died, others fell back in iron order. Whether anyone truly shouted La Garde recule. The Guard is retreating. and whether General Cambron really replied with a single famous word is less important than what everyone saw. The talisman had failed. The French center buckled. At the same moment, fresh Prussians smashed into Plancenoit again, while Zieten's I Corps arrived on Wellington's left. The Allied line surged forward. What had been a fight became a rout, guns abandoned, eagles dragged toward safety, night swallowing men and reputations. The last gamble of the greatest gambler of his age had come up short. By midnight, Napoleon's Army du Nord was shattered. He reached Paris, abdicated, and surrendered to the British. This time there was no indulgent Elba. The Emperor was sent to St. Helena, a hard rock in a wide ocean, to dictate memories to the wind. Waterloo ended a cycle of wars that had shaped a generation. It confirmed the Vienna settlement, launched decades of relative great power balance, and underscored the reach of British sea power. It also fixed Wellington and Blücher in the pantheon and closed the career of a man whose shadow still falls across the modern world. What if? What if the ground had been dry and the French bombardment opened hours earlier? Time favored Wellington and, above all, Blücher. What if Grouchy had marched to the guns instead of shadowing the Prussians at Wavre? Even 20 to 30,000 more French near evening might have secured Plancenoit and cracked Wellington's left. What if Ney's cavalry had waited for infantry plus close artillery? Squares don't like combined arms, the ridge might have crumpled in mid-afternoon. What if La Haye-Sainte had held 1 hour longer, or if Hougoumont had fallen at noon? The battle's geometry would have twisted, Wellington's calm might not have saved his line. Each fork invites debate. But time, bought by Wellington's defensive art and spent by Blücher's relentless march, decided the day. Napoleon's blows were late and fragmented, the coalitions were coordinated and timely. Closing narration for your video. On the 18th of June 1815, on a muddy Belgian ridge, an age of drums and eagles ended. The empire fell, not to genius alone, nor courage alone, but to time, terrain, and two commanders who refused to break. Your turn, which epic battle should we cover next, and why? Austerlitz, 1805, Napoleon's masterpiece of deception and timing? Trafalgar, 1805, Nelson's signal and the making of sea power? Leipzig, 1813, the Battle of the Nations, where the tide first turned? Drop your pick in the comments. Your idea might be the next episode.